Big week. Hey, listen, I want to congratulate you for watching. This is a lot of information. And the good news about the Brian Peterson School of Photography, BPSOP, is that you will have full access to all these videos for as long as these videos exist. The only reason they wouldn't exist is because all the updates have changed everything and we have to start over. You are not locked into this just this week or just this month, okay? It's okay. Take a deep breath. And if you can't keep up, that's all right too. But do send your questions every yours day, if you can think of it. This is bonus video 5, week 1. You're finished for the week after this video, and this one's a relatively short one. I want to talk to you about two things on this one video. There's a real Adobe Camera Raw editor, and beware, there's a fake. The real is non-destructive. The fake is destructive. Let me show you the difference so that you can watch a video. I watch these YouTube videos and you can look over their shoulder, look on their screen, and see that they're telling you improperly. They're teaching you about non-destructive, but they're using the fake, the destructive. They don't know any better. I'll show you how to detect it, like Sherlock Holmes, by looking right over their shoulder. Here we go. I'm in Adobe Camera Raw, currently via Bridge. Okay? Adobe Camera Raw, and I'm looking at this image, and you recognize at least some of these sliders already. Now I want you to notice at the bottom of Adobe Camera Raw, it says open. And if I just hit that button, it will launch this image, a copy of this image, into Photoshop. Just so you know, open ought to say open in Photoshop. We'll come back to this in a moment. I want you to look at my tools. Two of them in particular, because this is what we're going to investigate. There's a cropping tool. And there's the snapshots. All those photos stacked on top of each other. Keep an eye on that. All right, let's open in Photoshop. By the way, what you just saw was evidence that we were in the real Adobe Camera Raw. In the real Adobe Camera Raw, there's a cropping tool and a snapshot, but there's a fake. I'm in Photoshop, and someone may tell you, oh, just go up to the filter menu in Photoshop and pull down to the Camera Raw filter. That's the real Camera Raw also. No, it's not. This is the fake. This is not non-destructive. Let me flip that around instead of a double negative. This one is destructive. It gives you access to most of the tools. That's why it's there. Even in the destructive world, the jungle of Photoshop, you may still have fallen so in love with these tools that you'll want them. You'll crave them, even in Photoshop. That's what this is for. Let's go take a peek. Hey, it looks identical, doesn't it? It looks exactly like it did in the real Adobe Camera Raw. Or does it? Where's my cropping tool? Where are my snapshots? No, my friends, you're in the fake. You have access to the sliders, you have access to most of the tools, but this one is destructive. Beware. Beware. Let me cancel. Let me close. Actually, before I close, in Photoshop, how much attention have you paid to the actual layers panel and a thumbnail? Look at the thumbnail. I'm looking at it, Rick. Look at my eyeballs right next to it. It says background. I see it. All I'm seeing is the thumbnail. Let's close that. Back to the real Adobe Camera Raw. If you hold the Shift key in the real Adobe Camera Raw, it doesn't say open. It says open object. Open. That's a smart object. First part of the bonus video is that there's a real camera raw and a fake. Beware. The second point I want to make is that you can protect your images. You can save the baby even in Photoshop if you will only open your babies not as plain old open, but as smart objects. Open as objects. The official term is smart object. When I open this image as a smart object, Photoshop still launches, but I want you to notice the layers panel and the thumbnail. It's a smart object. Thumbnail. How do you know at a glance? You get this little extra icon in the bottom right. It's bubble wrap, or bubble wrap in a cage. Your baby is safe in the jungle of Photoshop. You can edit in any way in Photoshop and that baby will be saved. Now at this point, you might think it would be safe to go to the filter menu and open Adobe Camera Raw. And it would be safe to do that, to open the Camera Raw filter. But notice I'm still in the fake filter. No cropping tool. Why? Because Photoshop has its own cropping tool. It doesn't need it in the fake. Snapshots, it doesn't use them. Not real Photoshop. So I could edit, but I'm not going to. My baby would not be destroyed, but I'm still not getting full access in Photoshop to the full Adobe Camera Raw. But there's a way out. Since this baby began its life in Adobe Camera Raw and I'm editing now in Photoshop for some reason, maybe, I'd like to add type, which by the way, you can't do in Camera Raw. So I'm going to type Chicago because I can't do that in the real Adobe Camera Raw. I can only do that in Photoshop. So I'm going to do that. I'll ghost it back just a little bit by dialing the opacity back. You see? But now I want to make a change to my baby. Instead of clicking the original image and going to the filter, check out the magic. Double click the bubble wrap. Double click the icon. Watch what happens. You think you're in the Camera Raw filter, but you're not. Photoshop has a special arrangement with Adobe Camera Raw, the real. Look over. Do you see the cropping tool? I do. Do you see the snapshots? Oh, I do. You are in the real Adobe Camera Raw. I want to make a black and white out of it and hit OK. Have I hurt my baby? No. In fact, if you save this Photoshop file, you can open it. I keep saying this, in 20 years, a Photoshop file I can open and still double click on the bubble wrapped baby in the future and make any changes I want. Bring the color back and say, okay. You cannot hurt the baby. Smart objects wrap your baby in protective bubble wrap and allow you to continue to use the real Camera Raw rather than the fake Camera Raw. So Rick, you never used the fake Camera Raw. I didn't say that. I use the fake Camera Raw all the time, but not on my RAW files. Only on TIFF files or JPEG files, where the destruction has already been wrought or will be wrought. We'll learn more about that later as well. If you have questions about smart objects, send it to me. Notice that when I took that bubble wrap, it began its life in Bridge, Adobe Camera Raw. When I double clicked it, it took me back to the Adobe Camera Raw I'm familiar with in Bridge. I want to give you one last look at that panel, those tools, that histogram. All right, I'm going to close that image. Let's go ahead and quit Bridge. Here I am. I'm about to show you something that I think is horrifying. I can't believe Adobe have done this to us. I'm in Lightroom, and I'm editing in Lightroom. In fact, I've edited in Lightroom. Look here, black and white. Lightroom, I told you it's the same engine, Adobe Camera Raw, even though it looks different. Remember the solid histogram, the lighter gray background, lighter gray panel on a dark gray background? Remember all that? And now look, if I go to the photo menu, even in Lightroom, I can say edit in Photoshop. But wait, don't just edit in Photoshop. Open it as a smart object in Photoshop from Lightroom. That's not horrifying, that's marvelous. Let's do it. Here I am in Photoshop, looking at my edited in Lightroom RAW file. I still get the same protected bubble wrap. It's a smart object. It's time for me to go put the color back in. I did that a minute ago. Here's the horrifying part. I'm going to double click that smart object icon. And where does Adobe take me? Am I in the Lightroom version of Adobe Camera Raw? Is this the Lightroom panel? Or the Bridge one? See, they don't let you get back to Lightroom. Get all your color back in the Bridge and Photoshop version of Adobe Camera Raw, even if it began its life in Lightroom. Now here's the horrifying part. If that's not enough, the keyboard shortcuts are different. In Lightroom, the keyboard shortcuts are different in that panel than they are in Photoshop and Bridge. So if you're using Lightroom smartly to edit your RAW files and opening them smartly as smart objects in Photoshop, and you smartly, wisely want to re-edit them, you have to learn a whole second set of keyboard shortcuts. I don't know why Adobe have done that to us. It's part of the reason why I don't use Lightroom to edit my RAW files. I use Bridge. I've memorized one set of keyboard shortcuts that work in Bridge, Camera Raw, and Photoshop, and I can go back and forth wisely, smartly, saving my baby without having to learn a complete second set or a different version of the panels for Lightroom. I'm sorry, Lightroom users. It's not me, it's Adobe. Whine, complain, write your congressman, tie yourself up to a tree, do something in protest. That is horrifying. But now you know there's a real Camera Raw, a fake Camera Raw, and smart objects that work smartly from Bridge to Photoshop, a slight more horrifically from Lightroom to Photoshop and back. I'm just the piano player. Don't shoot me.